Hello, English 101 Group C. Apologize ahead of time in case my voice is wonky. I've been sick, so I will do my best to keep the snuffles to a minimum as I speak. So this is your tip session for project number 2. Hopefully a few people will be able to attend the live session, and then I'll be sending out a YouTube video afterward that will have the whole session. So I do know that this is coming a little bit late in the game. I actually, because of some of the discrepancies in the course calendar, I actually thought you guys had a little bit more time. So that's okay. I think that this should still help with your peer reviews and stuff like that. It'll help you guys sort of direct how you review your peers and stuff like that. So what I want to do right now is share my screen with you guys. I'm gonna make sure it doesn't do what it did last time. So I'm gonna hit here. I'm gonna go to screen share. I'm gonna share my entire screen. Okay, it's going on and on into the distance. Okay, so now we are in project 2 tips. I want to make sure that what's showing up here is right. Oh gosh. I'm hoping that it does. I don't have a great way to check it, so I'm hoping you can see what I can see. So here we are at project number 2, tips for succeeding on project 2 in English 101. If you guys can't see this, send me an email. I'm gonna have my email pulled up here on my phone so that I can check periodically to make sure that you guys aren't having any problems viewing this PowerPoint. Okay, so project number 2 tips for succeeding on project number 2. The first thing I kind of want to go over is just going back and looking at the project overview and really pulling some pieces out. I know that I'm giving you tips based off of what I've seen as consistent concerns coming up over the course of the project. So I want to make sure that those concerns are getting addressed in this tip session so that students aren't making sort of the same mistakes. So there's 2 sentences that I pulled out of the project overview. The first is the majority of your essay should focus on what story the photographer is trying to share with you through the camera lens. And then the majority of your writing should focus on analysis, illustrating how the photographer uses the rhetorical appeals to compose ideas about family traditions, culture, economics, nutrition, and/or globalization. So basically, we know some of Menzel's ideas from his TED Talk. The primary question you want to answer is, how does Menzel use parts of the image, so words, phrases, images, colors, patterns, spatial arrangement, to make rhetorical appeals that present a particular story or idea? This is your main idea. This is kind of like your thesis statement. So you are saying Menzel has composed the image in such a way as to make logos, pathos, and ethos appeals in order to get to a certain point or tell a certain story. For some reason, I see this come up a lot in student work where they've either said, oh, well, he has pathos through this, logos through this, and ethos through this, but never actually states what sort of idea or ideas he's getting across. Or where students will say, Menzel, teaches us about globalization and culture and blah, 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 but doesn't really tie in the rhetorical appeals very well. So the main point of this paper is for you to analyze how he gets his idea across using those rhetorical appeals. If you're not doing that, then the paper's not really completing the assignment. So I've put together a little, it's like a set of arrows here, right? So it's kind of going from biggest to smallest, right? So Menzel's idea is the overarching theme that you kind of want your paper to deal with. Everything in your paper should come back to the fact that this is the main idea or story he's trying to tell. This is the main takeaway he wants people to walk away with, basically, when they view this photo. The rhetorical appeals are one level lower than that because he's using them to get to that main point. The rhetorical appeals are made using the visual elements of the image. So how is he using lighting to make rhetorical appeal? How is he using image composition to make rhetorical appeal? How is he using design? How is he using color? How is he using the content of the image? Patterns, things like that. And those are, so he's using those to make specific rhetorical appeals, which he makes to overall support this one idea or claim. And you're basically unpacking how that happens. I've also put the secondary sources cultural background. Those are basically like, to a certain extent, they provide context for your reader about like the culture that Menzel is looking at, and they also provide sort of a sense of supplemental information that you're pulling in to further support what he's saying. So you might say, Menzel uses this visual element of the image to show this about this culture, which we know from the secondary source, right? So if, you know, he's got really bright colors, for example, and the scene seems really happy, and you look up the culture and you find out that this culture really values happiness over everything, and you know they're really into like being pretty cool and zen, then you could say Menzel uses bright colors to represent this cultural value of being happy. Once again, if you've tuned in late, you're welcome to email me and let me know if you cannot see anything or if you have any questions. I do have my email pulled up next to me here, so that this Hangout is working as well as possible. I think it is, but because I can't check it myself, I can't see what you guys are seeing. I can only see what I'm seeing. I want to make sure that it's coming across the best way possible. So please do send me an email if you're having trouble seeing it or anything. Okay, so I want to go through just a little bit with you guys. This is a family from Poland. I selected this photo to use as an example because I haven't seen it used very much in student essays. Over the time that I've been a writing fellow getting student essays submitted to me, I don't know if I've ever seen this photo get analyzed. And I'm sure there are students who've done it, but it's not super common. So I wanted to use it as an example. What I want to do right now is just take this photo and break down some of the parts of the photo so that you can see some of the like visual techniques that Menzel might be using. So I just wrote some notes that I have, right? For example, brightly lit. This is a really, it's a bright photo, especially like you look back here. This is washed out, which might be because the room back there is just really bright, and that's not necessarily something he can help unless he chose to take this photo at a certain time of day that this room would be washed out because he wants that bright light, or he wants that light coming in the way that it is. But it is really brightly lit, and there's a lot of bright colors. I'm especially focusing on these flowers. You know, like the flowers are maybe something they already have on the table, but it's definitely a huge compositional part of the image. You've got them all wearing bright colors. It's just a very bright image. There's also the use of leading lines. So that's something like you see the angle of this couch, the angle of the table, the angle of the cabinets, and even the way the people are standing. They're all leading the eye back here to where it's really bright, which, you know, I'm not doing a super in-depth analysis of this photo like you guys are, but that seems interesting to me, that everything is these leading lines leading back to where things are brighter. Jennifer, thank you for emailing me to let me know that you guys can see the PowerPoint. That really helps. I feel better now. The positions of the people too, right? Like these two are side by side, and they're positioned. Here's the TV. You've got one person over on the couch. So that's another breakdown of the elements is where the people are standing. They're all the way at the back. They're sort of mid-range. She's sort of mid-range. There's no focus on the people toward the front of the image. Mirroring. This is something I noticed as I was taking these notes, that the cabinets are this sort of dark red color, and so is the couch. So that's an interesting way of these two colors are being mirrored, where you've got a lot of blue and a lot of lighter colors, blue and white through the middle here. There's a text element because the caption is there, so that adds an extra element of text to the image. Then I was looking at some of the content. This elephant is really weird. I don't know what it's there for. That's something that definitely could use some analysis, because you know, Menzel definitely set up these photos in such a way that he wanted to take them a specific way. So what's this elephant doing here? I don't know. And then the content of the image, right? So where is the food placed? You know, the fact that there's the dog here and the dog food over here. The food that's in the image, where it's placed, who the family members are, things like that. These are all the kinds of photographic elements that Menzel is using to compose this photograph. And these are the kinds of things that are those building blocks that you use to talk about the rhetorical analysis. So when you go into talking about the rhetorical appeals, the thing that's crucial is making connections between the parts of the image and the rhetorical appeals, right? So here's me coming in with this family from Poland. I know that Menzel is a professional photographer from his use of leading lines to make a clean, well-organized photograph that looks professional. So I'm taking this as if I am viewing this photo and I don't necessarily have any of that outside research to tell me that he's a professional photographer. I'm treating this, because I'm analyzing the photo, I'm treating it very much as, here's what the photo and the caption alone are able to tell me to help make Menzel's argument. So I can tell from the photo alone that he's using leading lines, which makes a professional looking photograph. That makes me trust him. That is an example of ethos, to represent things in a powerful way for the eye. I know he interviewed the family and did research on how their currency relates to that of the United States, the foods that they like, things like that, based off the caption here. That kind of research tells me that I can trust him to, one, personally know the family, and two, know this information based off the research he's done. He's not just pulling it out of nowhere. So those are two ways that I think that this helps show ethos in the photograph. And but those are, I'm pulling in really specific elements of the image and showing how, and connecting them to the ethos, showing how these make an appeal to my trust, to my ethos. So then you ultimately have to tie all of those things back to the overall message Menzel is sending. So if we go back and look at this right here, I'm kind of going backwards for you guys, right? So visual elements to rhetorical appeals to Menzel's idea. Here's the umbrella overarching thing. Here's, if you break that down into how he uses these appeals, ethos, logos, pathos. And then here, if you break it down even further into how he's using the visual elements of the image to make these rhetorical appeals. So it's important to tie the rhetorical analysis back to the larger message he's sending. It's all about tying everything back to your thesis or your main idea, which is he uses the rhetorical appeals in these ways in order to present this specific message. So he's inspiring my trust in him as a photographer and as a researcher, which makes me more likely to believe his messages that I made this up. I made this up like so last minute. So this is not necessarily a main message of Menzel's. I'm using it as an example. So he makes me more likely to believe his message that retaining culture through food is crucial to individual and family happiness. Like I pulled this out of nowhere, if you want to talk about pulling things out of nowhere. But I wanted to use it as an example for you guys, because if this were, for example, my thesis, if this were, I were writing this paper and I said, what I really think Menzel is trying to argue in this photograph is that the way that, you know, food is an element of culture, and holding on to our culture through our cultural foods make us happier, then I would analyze all parts of the photo according to how is he using the rhetorical appeals to make this point. So I know he's done research to come to this conclusion. I know he's presenting his photo in a way that portrays that idea, but is doing so in a professional and ethical way. So these ethos appeals may not be making his exact argument the way that logos or pathos appeals might, because a lot of times pathos appeals, it's not like they're just trying to make you feel something. They're trying to make you feel a certain way related to the main message. So, and logos appeals are very much the same in terms of they are trying to get you to come to a certain conclusion related to the main message. Ethos is more like you're coming to a conclusion that Menzel is trustworthy and that his message is trustworthy. but they support the argument by getting me to trust how he chooses to make the argument. So I know he's done the research to come to this conclusion. I know he's presenting this photo in a professional and ethical way, and that makes me more likely to believe his message because he's inspired my trust in him with his use of leading lines, which shows that he's professional, and with the detail he includes in the caption, which shows me that he's done his research. So there's a little bit on secondary sources and cultural background that I want to go into, which is, in particular, it can be easy to get really lost and say way too much on the cultural background. I've read project number 2 submissions that have been more of, here, let me tell you about Norway, than here, let me analyze this photograph. So you need to focus on the purpose of this paper. Remember the purpose of this paper. This paper is to do an analysis of how the visual elements of the photograph make certain rhetorical appeals in order to make an overall claim or tell an overall story. I know that I keep repeating this nonstop over and over, but it feels like something that I kind of have to really hammer in because it's something that seems so easily missed and something that I've seen students miss a lot. So don't get lost in all the information about the culture. This is supplemental information that you use to back up your main point. When you include information about the country or culture you're analyzing, you should ask yourself, does this support my claim about the point Menzel is making through the use of rhetorical appeals in this image? So if you're saying he is making a point about globalization, he is making a point about culture, he is making a point about isolation, he is making a point about nutrition transition, right? You have to make sure that the information on the cultural background and on the secondary sources, that contextual information that you bring in, helps you make that point. If it doesn't help you make that point, take it out. I don't care what elevation Norway is at, unless it somehow has something to do with the main point you're making. I don't necessarily care what the main foods of the country are, unless him including or not, unless those foods being included or not included in the photograph somehow help make his larger point, right? Everything that you bring in, you want to bring in to help support your argument that this is the point Menzel is making through this image. So I pulled in something from the Better Life Index from OECD. This is linked. And this says, when asked to rate their general satisfaction with life on a scale from 0 to 10, polls gave it a 5.8 grade, lower than the OECD average of 6.6. So if my argument is that Menzel's message is that retaining culture through food is crucial to individual and family happiness, and we can see here that polls have a lower average general satisfaction with life, then I might come back to this photograph and go, okay, well, I thought this photograph was meant to look really happy because of all the bright colors and because they're smiling, but maybe what he's showing is that even though things might seem happy on the surface, look at all this packaged food, you know, look at all this globalized stuff that they've got, look at all this candy and this stuff back here. This might actually, you know, it might actually be more of showing that the way that their culture has been taken away from them in the form of processed, packaged, globalized foods is actually making them less happy, which is part of why we can see this 5.8 grade on their general satisfaction with life so lower than average. That's kind of a connection I can make, that I'm using this element of the photograph in terms of the globalized food, and it's also in terms of the brightness of it, to make an overall claim about his message. So this is relevant because I make it relevant, but I'm not just going to tell you this and walk away from it. So even if you've done all the parts, you've looked at visual elements of the photograph, you've said, oh, this is a rhetorical appeal, and you've explained how Menzel uses those appeals to make the claim, if what you're saying is obvious, then it's not that exciting. You know, it's not really an in-depth analysis. So something like this. The whole family is smiling. I see a lot of these where it's more commentary on the content of the photo and not a lot on the visual elements of the photo. So do try and make sure that you're not just saying, like, oh, the family looks like this, the food looks like this. Like, also talk about the color, also talk about leading lines, also talk about any elements of design that you can find, talk about them. And if you're not comfortable with elements of design, Google some stuff. Elements of like good photography. Just Google some stuff. So you've got the whole family is smiling. I'm already not about that because I've heard it in every single Project 2 paper ever. That's a pathos appeal because when they're happy, it makes viewers happy. Okay, well, that's fair enough. Menzel uses making viewers happy to make them agree with his stance that food makes people happy. One, like, that's not an interesting argument for Menzel to be making. I would not want to read a paper that analyzes how Menzel makes people think food makes them happy, right? Like, that's not that complex. The connection that's been drawn here is not that complex. Like, seeing happy people makes people happy, which proves the point that food is happy. I think that you can tell just from what's here that this is just not a very compelling argument. As opposed to if you look at like some of the stuff that I did in breaking down ethos, right? I talked about his use of leading lines. I talked about the information in the caption. I talked about how those things led me to trust him as a photographer and as a researcher, and how that trust overall made me more likely to believe his message because I knew he was well researched in what he was talking about and well equipped to be doing it in the way he was doing it as a photograph. That's got a little bit more depth to it than sort of this idea of like smiling is happiness, yay, you know. So surprise me, say things I haven't heard before. Keep in mind, if I were your audience, which I'm not, according to the assignment, it's your peers, but if I were your audience, you know, think about all the things I've probably heard about this photograph before. I've been a writing fellow for a year and a half, so I've heard a lot of arguments. If you can say something new to really pull in your original ideas about the photograph, that's where your paper is going to shine. It's in your originality and in the quality of your analysis. Connections, connections, connections. This paper is all about making connections and going deep. There are a lot of layers here, so don't be afraid to really dig into them. You could tell with the arrow thing that I did, where it went from Menzel's idea to rhetorical appeals to, there's a lot of going in and out of layers. So your deepest layer being sort of the really specific building blocks of the photograph, and then you've got a layer out from that where it's how those building blocks make rhetorical appeals, and then a layer out from that where how those rhetorical appeals are making his main point. And then you've got this supplemental information you're bringing in on the context of the country. Like, allow those things to be complex. And don't be afraid to really dig into them and explain them. Just make sure you're explaining everything. So, in your Hungry Planet photo, when you put it together, consider how you're using the rhetorical appeals. Have you placed yourself in the photograph? This is one of the things I see a lot with with their multimodal portion, where they make their own photograph, is sometimes students don't have the opportunity to get somebody to take a photo of them, or they just sort of throw everything together last minute and don't have someone there with them that can take a photo. I know that it can be hard, but putting people in the photo is such a key part of Menzel's photography. Like, the food on the table doesn't mean anything if you can't see the people it's attached to. It's hard to find meaning in the image when it's just a pile of food on a tabletop without a person or people to give that image context. So if you have the opportunity, if you just took a picture of your food and didn't include yourself, if you have the opportunity to retake that photo, I would really stress being able to include yourself in your own piece, because the people are what give the food context. Really think about audience. If you were a viewer looking at this image, what would be your takeaways and why? How do you, as the person composing the image, make people have those takeaways? How are you using rhetorical appeals to make a main point in your image, to come to a main idea in your image? So I just wanted to put this little piece in here at the end of this presentation, which is just the idea of divide and conquer. Divide the photograph into individual pieces and conquer each of them individually. What are the colors? How do those make a rhetorical appeal? How does that rhetorical appeal apply to Menzel's idea? What's the design? I mean, what patterns are used, for example? How do those make a rhetorical appeal, right? divide it into each of those pieces and conquer them individually. And I think you'll probably feel a lot more comfortable with doing this and maybe not so overwhelmed. That's all I have for you guys on this. I hope this was helpful. I'm gonna come back to this endless. Here I am. Hi. Yeah, so that's all I have for you guys. Feel free to email me if you have any questions about this presentation or if you have any concerns or anything. As I said, I will be accepting Project 2 more feedback submissions on the more feedback discussion board starting now-ish, if you feel like you've done everything I said, or a little while afterward if you want to go and make some revisions to your paper based off of the tips that I've given you. And I will be accepting those, and they're due by midnight tomorrow. So make sure that you submit your paper for more feedback from me, your writing fellow. I am hoping that I'm not going to get papers that I have to tell, you know, here's what the assignment was. You have to look at the parts of the photograph and how they make rhetorical appeals and how those appeals make a main idea. That's kind of why I wanted to do this tip session, because I've found so often that I have to give feedback that's literally like, so here's what your assignment is. You need to go back and kind of like make sure that you're doing it. So I want to make sure that you guys are well equipped for that when you turn your papers into me. Again, get them in by midnight tomorrow. If I don't get 12 by midnight tomorrow, I will accept what'll bring it up to 12 by noon on Wednesday, just because I know it's kind of a last minute thing. And make sure you're still getting your peer review papers in by midnight tonight. So your peer review stuff in by midnight tonight. That's all I have for you. Thanks for to the 3 of you that watched. I am always excited when I get live viewers because that makes me feel really great. This is like a mini classroom space, and I'm really excited about that. So thanks all of you for watching, and good luck as you work on those drafts of your papers. I'm really excited to see what comes to me in the next couple days. All right. Bye, everybody.